Sumedha Rao, thanks so much for joining me. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much for having me, John.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation because this push to, well, I'll just say the consideration of establishing municipal utilities. This is happening all over the country for different reasons. And in looking at what you guys are working on in Louisville and considering is kind of unique and different from different exercises that we've seen in places like Maine or San Diego that are considering like takeovers of their investor-owned utilities. So I'm looking forward to just unpacking this process and what you guys are hoping to accomplish. Before we get into all of that, can you give me a brief rundown of your background and your role with the city?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Sumedha Rao, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability with Louisville Metro Government. Louisville is the largest city in Kentucky, and we exist in a very fossil fuel dependent, regulated, state-regulated, investor-owned monopoly environment. And our community has been advocating for clean energy goals for a long time. So a couple of years ago, our State Metro Council passed a resolution to commit Louisville to getting to 100% clean electricity by 2030, 100% clean energy for metro-wide operations by 2035, and then 100% clean energy community-wide by 2040. We also have a net zero goal of net zero by 2040. So our office has been tasked with leading a lot of this work, and a greenhouse gas inventory that we did in 2016 showed us that the energy grid is a big source of our scope 1 and 2 emissions. So we've had a lot of push from our legislators and our community to focus on energy solutions. And we've been working with our local utility and other partners to figure out what avenues there are. And right after this resolution was passed, we had contracted with the National Renewable Energy Lab to explore what pathways we have to achieve 100% clean electricity by 2030. And ultimately, the study we're going to talk about today was one of the recommendations that came out of that. They gave us multiple pathways to pursue. So a lot of what we've been doing over the last few years at the Office of Sustainability has been diving deep into energy. We're also involved in various other sustainability initiatives across the city, but this is a big focus for us.
And it's super unique, as I mentioned. So in those other examples, obviously, San Diego is in a state that does prioritize clean energy and is a leader globally. So that's not their reason for considering a municipal utility. It's more around how investments are being made and equity and energy justice, those kinds of things. In Maine, kind of a similar situation. It's around how are funds being used to harden the grid and make it more reliable, customer engagement, that kind of stuff. You're going at it from the decarbonization point of view. And I don't know that I've seen that as the starting point for a city yet that has considered the, what do we call it, municipalization of their utility. And the backdrop is also fascinating. So a lot of our cities are pursuing net zero. The major cities are often more liberal leaning and care about climate change and want clean energy. Cities in the South, especially, are then the so-called blueberry in the tomato soup. You are in Kentucky. You don't sit in SPP where there's a bunch of wind. You don't sit in MISO where there's a bunch of wind. You're in a state that doesn't really care that much about renewables yet. In the territory of a utility with almost 90% of its power being generated by coal. So those dynamics make a 2040 target seem quite daunting because that's not so far away. So let's unpack those scenarios then too, because the study that was conducted by Siemens, I think you guys just got your hands on it. You're looking at a partial municipal utility concept, another thing I haven't really seen before. So explain that and why you guys arrived there. I know that was one of the options on the spectrum that NREL shared with you a couple of years back.
Yeah, absolutely. And to give you context on the full spectrum, so essentially we had asked them to explain all of the options that we had available to us to achieve the first goal of 100% clean electricity for metro government operations by 2030. And they gave us a spectrum of 5 options. So on one end of the spectrum was working with our existing utility, Louisville Gas and Electric, through their existing green tariff programs. And on the other end of the spectrum was full municipalization of the community-wide utility. And in between, the options were to buy, to do VPPAs. So that was the second option. The third option was to just engage in advocacy with the utility and the Public Service Commission and advocate for them to change their trajectory with more clean energy. And then the fourth one was partial municipalization, which is just municipalizing to meet metro government's needs. So we are in the process of working with our utility to explore what a green tariff would look like. There have been some complications because of the size of customer that we are. We're not large enough to be part of one of their typical larger PPA projects, but we're kind of in between of not being large enough or small enough to fit into one of the products that they have. So we're navigating that at the moment. We weren't as interested in the VPPAs. We wanted local projects in as much as possible for the economic development and other benefits and the clean air benefits. We are very active on the policy advocacy side. We're constantly intervening with the Public Service Commission and also engaging with all our utility stakeholder processes to advocate for clean energy and environmental justice. And then when it came to municipalization, I think we were all curious to do a full municipalization study, but ultimately the answer isn't very glamorous. It was out of budget, so we settled for a partial municipalization study, kind of as a way to dip our feet in the water and get a start and explore what this even looks like to begin with.
So the study was too expensive, or just even the prospect of full municipalization was too expensive, or both?
Well, the study.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I think I read the study was something like $140,000 with Siemens, and those are big studies, lots of consultants.
Yes.
Okay, so let's unpack the study then. I know you guys looked at not taking over utility assets like some of the other proposals call for, where the public through some kind of bond or referendum pays out the utilities, the local government then takes on those assets, existing poles and wires. You guys instead looked at building your own poles and wires that do not connect to the local distribution grid, which is kind of the whole thing we tried to avoid 100 years ago, and not having, wires going everywhere. So that's one interesting piece. And then also there's an aspect of transmission in trying to build a line to connect to MISO so that you have access to more abundant clean power on the real-time and spot markets, which you don't have access to now. You're so dependent on your local utility. And I get why you would go that route, in that, as you mentioned, the VPPA format and RECs get you net zero on paper, but don't get you net zero as a community, and all of those benefits that come with not breathing in emissions from a coal power plant. So given I kind of gave the high level, I guess, summary of the plan, what did Siemens come back to you and say was feasible or realistic as part of this push?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges of doing a partial municipalization versus a full municipalization study was that we were proposing to take certain loads off the grid and go clean energy with those loads, but then there would still be customers in those same areas that would still be using the existing grid. So there wasn't really an option to buy out that infrastructure because they would still be using it to serve other customers. So the only option then was to build out a new system that would basically overlay the system and only serve the loads that we were interested in. So we started off with just, I know it sounds messy, but we were trying to explore the options with the means that we had.
No, I love it. I didn't mean to position it as messy. I think it's very creative, and I imagine would require some significant regulatory approval. But go on. It's very interesting.
Yeah, so we started with just city loads because we said ultimately 2030 is 6 years away. We want to get to that goal of 100% clean electricity by then. We're very serious about it. And conversations with the utility at the time were not very encouraging in terms of we didn't think that we would have an option through their green tariff programs. So this was a serious pathway that we had to consider. And when Siemens started to do the study, they quickly discovered that the municipal load was not sufficient because our buildings are pretty disparately spread across the city. We do have more buildings in the downtown area, but we also have some spread out buildings. So if you're trying to build infrastructure to reach all of these loads, the economy of scale just wasn't there. So then we reached out to a lot of our quasi-public partners, like the water company, the sewer district, the public university, and the school system, just to try to gauge some interest and collect some data and see what would be possible. And again, not the most glamorous answer, but we ran into your very regular challenges of capacity and getting data in time. So ultimately, we ended up getting Louisville Water Company's data. So we combined Louisville Metro government and water company's data to complete the study. And I think that the other partners were interested. Is just one of those things where how long are we going to wait to get all of the data that we need versus at what point do we have enough that we kind of get the gist of what the study's result is going to be.
Okay, so in figuring out how to meet your needs based on the city's load and then these goals of community-wide decarbonization, what exploration of community-owned distributed energy resources did you guys have in terms of, do we go out there and build our own community solar farm, or do we contract for some batteries? I know that you still have to play with the utility on that front, and they are the ones that go through resource planning. So I'm sure that too gets messy, but curious if that fit into the process here.
Yeah, so we don't really have any options outside of behind the meter solutions, which, decentralized solar would not have been enough to cover our full load. We are trying to maximize that and accelerate efforts on that front. But in terms of community solar or doing something like what Cincinnati did, which was kind of bid out to an independent solar contractor, that's just not possible in our utility environment. So we would have to go through the green tariff or some program that the utility has in order to make that work.
I love this interview because it sounds like you guys started with a blank whiteboard and said, we don't really have any playbook to follow here. We have a ton of roadblocks along the way. Think as outside the box as you possibly can on how do we get there? What are we going to do? Okay, so the study is in. What does it look like in terms of costs? Because I know you're comparing this to existing opportunities with the utility through power purchase agreements or whatever. You want to get access to wholesale electricity markets where there's clean power, and you can definitively say our electrons are coming from a region that is highly supported by wind power. What would that distribution system at the local level and then the transmission tie cost?
So the study that Siemens did concluded that the full cost of building out the system would be $341 million, which they said if we were to, typically what you would do in such a situation is finance that through municipal bonds. And they estimated that would be about a $30 million amortized rate per year for 30 years. So I think that price tag was pretty conclusive in terms of telling us that that's probably not going to be possible, especially because since the study started, our conversations with our utility have started to turn more optimistic, and it sounds like there may be a green tariff option pathway forward for us after all, which would come at a much lower price tag than that. So yes, it was very helpful to understand what that would look like, but to also get a sense of price comparison with other options we were looking at.
I guess, and not looking at that process then as a loss, because if it's infeasible, you can't as stewards of public funds go down a route of spending $900 million on a system with all the interest factored in. That's crazy, and I know would lead even from ardent climate warriors a rebuke of any decision that led down that path. But there could be an argument that had you not started this process, engaged with NREL, spent the money with Siemens, the utility may not have taken this seriously or may not have considered all of your wishes. Do you feel like that's true? Like there's some intertwining here in the benefit maybe that you've had in improved negotiations with LG&E?
I would say so. We talked to a few cities that have been down this path in different situations before. And one of the things that we did here is that if nothing, it brings the utility to the conversation a little bit more. And I think that maybe in some ways this played into that. I can't speak for them, but maybe this did have something to do with the more positive conversations we're having with the utility now. But on the other hand, the other thing that this was helpful for our community was to just know that we've done our due diligence on exploring all of these pathways. And if we do decide to go down a green tariff options, I think people will feel more comfortable knowing that we did explore other options. So that's also helpful. And the study did ultimately say that if, currently the study analyzes Louisville Metro and Louisville Water Company loads. And the study found that if that load were to be tripled, then it would ultimately become cost competitive compared to the price per watt we're currently paying. So that's just helpful context to have if for whatever reason that becomes a pathway we want to pursue in the future. But so I think we value having that information. But yeah, we don't see it as as not a useful effort. I think there's been some positive outcomes from it.
So tripling the load gets you to parity. Does that also factor in the additional poles and wires that you would have to build in order to serve the whole community and all, the ongoing operations and maintenance?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I think they had to do some adjusting to basically ensure that you're adding additional load, but also you're not adding too much more infrastructure. So kind of finding more load within the same grid that they had designed. So the sweet spot was basically 3 times that load would get us to price parity.
Sumedha Rao, thank you so much for joining me. And I really appreciate getting to learn more about what you're working on and wish you guys the best of luck wherever that ends up leading you.
Yes, thank you so much. We know that this may seem like a bit of a scrappy effort to some, but ultimately our community is just very excited about clean energy and willing to explore all pathways to get there. And we're happy. We're looking forward to seeing where this leads. So great chatting with you.